Here. Welcome to day 3 of our climate talks. Today we'll be talking about materials, waste, and food as part of our climate action plan update for the city of Fremont. Here's an agenda for today. Just very briefly, we'll be talking for about 5 or 10 minutes, giving you a brief update on the CAP process. We have 2 different amazing panelists here to talk to you about waste and food. Then we'll take some questions from the chat and have about 20 minutes for a community discussion. And at the end, we'll close you out by giving you a brief reminder about the Considerate platform that's currently active and open to accept your questions, ideas, opinions before sending you off for the afternoon. Starting with just to ground our discussion today, I'll tell you a little bit about where we've been already. So our climate action plan update is going to be building on the success we've already had with our first climate action plan, which we adopted in 2012 as a city, and set a goal which we achieved of 25% GHG emissions reductions by 2020. So now that we've reached the conclusion of that planning effort, and on the next slide I'll actually show you how we achieve those reductions and in which areas. We're looking ahead to the next decade and beyond. Some of the state goals we set for GHG emissions reductions and considering how the city of Fremont can take action. So this is part of a larger effort that we set out to do starting in 2019 by passing a carbon neutrality resolution. It kind of sets the stage for our work here today. We're aiming for carbon neutrality by 2045 with this interim goal by 2030 of 55% emissions reduction. And we've got this framework that's going to help to guide our work here, looking to see as we put forth this climate action plan and the different measures and areas such as buildings, energy, water, and waste, looking to make sure that we embody equity and access in those measures, that the city is continuing to be a leader in efficiency and innovation, that we're embodying health and wellness in the measures and considering how we can raise health and increase the wellness of all the residents and folks who use and live in the city of Fremont. And then also resiliency and capacity building are big topics for us as we consider the adverse impacts of climate change on our community, such as the ones you may have experienced this past year, and consider looking ahead how we can mitigate those and adapt the city to make it a safe and healthy place for people to live. So we've broken down kind of our different areas of action into 7 different strategies. Today we're focused on maybe this 5th one down here, resource conservation and elimination of waste. But we're really seeking to take this holistic approach that touches on different areas, such as clean and renewable power, electrification and fossil fuel phase out in buildings, carbon sequestration, which is about drawing down carbon from the atmosphere. So not only do we want to lower the emissions we're creating, but also want to actually grab the particles of carbon and put them back in the earth, put them back in the water where they can be safely stored. Yesterday, we had a great session on mobility and connectivity, working with transportation and land use. Today, we're touching on resource conservation and elimination of waste. And then later on this week, we'll be talking more about restorative ecology, farming, our parks, our urban tree canopy, and then finally, climate adaptation and resilience, which really touches on some of these other areas, but then specifically focuses on adaptation planning.
Hey, Robbie, I think
Yes.
I'm good now if you want me to take over.
Feel free to jump
in. All right. Sorry about the technical challenges. So yeah, in terms of our community-wide emissions to date, this chart shows you that, we started at over 1.6 million metric tons of carbon dioxide back in 2005. And we had a goal of doing a 25% emission reduction by the year 2020. We've actually achieved and surpassed that as of our 2018 greenhouse gas emissions inventory. And so the first star here is that 2020 target. Then you can see our 2030 target on the second star is a 55% emission reduction below our 2005 baseline. So what we have here is a projected emission graph, and this is based on what you would see if the city were not to take any local action, but we continue to see some emissions reductions because of policy that's currently in place according to state legislation. This wouldn't account for any new legislation, and this wouldn't account for any local action. So what we're really trying to do here is close the gap and get our emissions down to this 55% target we've set for ourselves through a variety of different local actions that we put forth in our climate action plan. One thing also to note here in this graph is you can see a substantial amount of emissions reductions that have been achieved in the last handful of years have really come from the electric sector in building energy usage. And that's because we've supplied the grid with more renewable power, and we've had an increasing number of rooftop solar installations. So as we've really lowered and starting to taper out the emissions associated with electricity usage, what we have left are emissions associated with waste and then with gas consumption in buildings and in our transportation sector. So ways that we can do that in terms of closing the local gap through action, we can adopt local ordinances, we can implement new building and zoning codes, we can develop incentive and recognition programs for the community, and those are things that we're already doing. And then, we can also look at, for our own city infrastructure, making upgrades like things we've done already, LED streetlights, for instance, and other opportunities as well when it comes to, mobility infrastructure, the protected bike lanes. And then we get into kind of the regional and state and federal collaboration and policy advocacy. And so that's really looking at what could be happening with those agencies, what they can do for us, and how can we advocate for additional resources to help implement at the local level. And then finally, we're constantly looking at funding mechanisms to do this, because we don't have a substantial budget to do this work at the local level. We don't want this to be an additional burden for others. I think somebody needs to mute their mic. Sorry about that. And then, we want to make sure that we're bringing in additional resources to our community. Next slide, Robbie. So through all this collaboration, it's super important. We are the city government. There are a lot of other public agencies within our community. And then there's all of you, community members, who are going to be the ones to really help make this happen. And we want to be able to get you the resources. We want you to be participants in this plan so that we, as a team, are working forward and trying to implement our goals around sustainability. And we've already been doing quite a bit of engagement through this effort. In September, we kicked off our community engagement around the Climate Action Plan update with a big community workshop. We had about 160 participants, and the mayor kicked off with some opening remarks for that. We're doing this series of climate talks. As Robbie mentioned, we already had a discussion around mobility and land use yesterday. And on Monday, we talked about energy and buildings. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about urban and natural landscapes and water consumption. And then on Friday, we're going to be talking more about the green economy. And then we're going to plan another workshop in the coming month or so around the topic of resilience and equity, looking at adaptation strategies, as well as fostering deeper community connections. And finally, we've been engaging with the community recently through our online virtual community forum called Consider It. Robbie, next slide. So Consider It is an opportunity for you to be able to look at a variety of strategies that we've seen in other communities. We know are ways to get us toward carbon neutrality, and we want you to weigh in on those and let us know what you think. Are these things that we should do in the city of Fremont that you want to see more of, or are there challenges with these? Do you have comments in terms of your issues with implementation or ways that you think we can make this happen? And then also, do you have any other ideas for us? Maybe there's a strategy that we haven't put forth that you think is really important, and you can add that to this tool. So we're going to keep this open for the next week or so that anybody who participated in our climate talks this week has an opportunity to go in and participate. Or if you've already participated, you can always go back and look at people's comments and then respond to those as well. And so it's an opportunity to have continuous engagement. Next slide. All right, so diving deeper into materials, waste, and food, today is going to be a really great discussion. We have some folks from our Environmental Services Department and from Stop Waste to share, and I just wanted to do a couple intro slides before I hand it off to them. So first of all, compared to buildings and transportation, waste is less emissions than those sectors, for sure. It's about 5% of our total greenhouse gas emissions. But one caveat there is that this is reflective of only what we call scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. So I'll explain that in just a second here. Robbie, next slide. Scope 1 and scope 2 don't tell the whole story of stuff. And I put this in here for anyone who maybe has seen the story of stuff. You'll understand that there's a lot that goes into the production, the distribution, and eventual disposal of waste materials. And if you haven't, I definitely recommend watching it. It's about a 20-minute film, and it's a great overview of our material processes in this planet. Next slide, Robbie. So how we calculate emissions. Scope 1 emissions and scope 2 emissions are really what we are looking at for our greenhouse gas inventory as a community. And those are emissions. Scope 1 is either emissions that are happening directly in our community. So emissions from the tailpipe of cars or from the burning of natural gas in your home or in your business. Scope 2 are indirect emissions from energy that we use in the form of electricity. So, that energy may be produced somewhere else, but we're using it within our community. And then scope 3 is everything else. So that includes, the emissions associated with producing materials somewhere else, say if those materials were produced in another part of the country or in another country altogether. Those emissions would be considered scope 1 or scope 2 emissions in those locations, but for us, they're considered scope 3. And then there's the downstream emissions as well. What happens once those materials are used in our community and then they leave and they go into a recycling plant or into a landfill? The emissions that we calculate for waste are associated with moving waste from our community to the landfill. So the emissions of a vehicle moving that waste, and then also the off-gassing of those materials in the landfill. But we're not looking at everything else that doesn't get landfilled either. So really, when we calculate waste emissions, we're missing a lot in terms of the impact of waste in our community. Next slide. So this is a quick snapshot here. The Bay Area Air Quality Management District and UC Berkeley's Cool Climate Network partnered up a couple years ago and did what they call a consumption-based inventory for cities across the Bay Area. And they looked at everything. So they looked at, all sorts of emissions related to food consumption, clothes, air travel, vehicle manufacturing. And what they found is that emissions, if we look at it from a consumption perspective, are much higher than if we look at it just from a scope 1 and scope 2 perspective, or a sector-based approach. And so what I've highlighted here are the emissions that we are calculating in our greenhouse gas inventory. So vehicle fuel direct consumption, and then also, energy consumption and waste. But we're not looking at all of these other emissions associated with the waste sector. And then we're also not looking at some of the emissions associated with things like air travel or vehicle repair. Next slide, Robbie. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to my colleague Lori in Environmental Services, who's going to talk to you more about how we can zero emissions in materials and waste.
Great, thank you, Rachel. I'm Lori Matter from the Environmental Services Department, and thank you for joining in our discussion today. We're always interested in hearing more ideas from the community. And so basically, I'm going to talk a little bit about reuse and sharing options that we have in the community. Luckily, for some of the measures that we propose, we're doing something in all of those measures. So within the city offices, very basic, we have reusable plates and reusable utensils that the city uses. On Stop Waste website and on our website, there's a great new resource which tells you how you can get rid of unwanted items that are either broken or still working and potentially have some reuse available. Obviously, you do this every time you give something away on Nextdoor. And the main library has some great space in Fremont they have a new maker space called Archimedes, and you're able to borrow computers for there. So the library is kind of the original model, and we were hosting Fix-It clinics there before we had the pandemic, but now they're virtual and they're at any time on demand. So go to fixitclinic.com and you can find some great virtual information on just how to repair things right in your home. Next slide, Robbie. Great. And so one of the biggest things and easiest things you can do is just reduce the amount of material that you throw away. So we're available to help you figure out how to recycle. And I say recycling right now because it's not a static process. Recycling materials are commodities and they change. So right now there's things that we can't accept because of some new policies in China, and there's always standard requirements. So recycling right now is kind of an evolving thing. So you can't learn how to recycle things once and forget it. So we do want you to stay up to date on the items that can go into your recycling bins. And composting organics is one of the easiest and biggest impactful things that you can do to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions here. So when organic materials, we're talking about food scraps, napkins, any kind of food, soil, paper, and landscaping debris, yard waste, any of that stuff that ends up in the landfill is going to generate methane, and that's a big problem for climate change. Also, for our deconstruction and construction debris recycling options, we do follow the Cal Green requirements that require 65% recycling on specific construction projects. And deconstruction is just one other option that has a little bit better benefit for climate change. You don't have to bring in big equipment. Things are deconstructed by hand. So that's one potential measure that we're looking at implementing. Next slide, Robbie. And so basically, this is just talking about your 4 R's. We're talking about reuse, reduction, recycling. Energy recovery is when you burn materials for electricity. And then finally, treatment and disposal is the landfill. So we're going to start at the top. The biggest thing we want you to do is reduce the amount of stuff you use that you buy. And then when you can, reuse the items as well. Those are the priority, as you can tell by the hierarchy here. Next option below that is to recycle or compost. And then way at the bottom is landfilling. So that is the least preferred method. Thank you, Robbie. Next slide. And these are just some general numbers for Fremont. We have about 232,000 residents here. The waste generated is about 55% by weight from the commercial sector, 45% by the residential sector. So that means commercial tons based in 2019 were about 112,000 tons, about 92,000 tons from residents. And so this 4.7 pounds of garbage per person is how the state measures Fremont's disposal. So we want to get that number as low as possible. Next slide, please. And so this is just a snapshot of what is in the garbage in California. As you can see, a big chunk of the materials or organics at 34%. This is what we need to pull out of your garbage bin and put into your green cart. And so these are, 10 million tons in California, 100,000 tons in Fremont from year to year. So there's plenty of opportunity for us to reduce the organics. And that's one of the biggest focuses that our department has. Next slide, please. And the reason we have such a big focus on this is because there's a new state law coming January 2022, and this will require all businesses and all residents in town to separate out food scraps and have organic collection. And we're doing pretty good. We have a lot of residents who participate in the food scraps programs and a lot of businesses as well. This is just going to require everyone across the board to do it. And one of the biggest components is that it will require that we rescue edible food before throwing it away or composting it. And that's just going to be a good step into making sure that we're not throwing away food that's perfectly useful when we have people that are hunger challenged in this area. Next slide, please. Great. And so one of the ways we consider doing this is decreasing packaging waste. A couple years ago, we talked about removing straws or only asking for straws on request. So currently we have an ordinance that says all the takeout containers have to be reusable or compostable. They can't be styrofoam, but we want to take that a little further to make sure that people are only getting materials that can be reused or recycled even when they take it out. And now with all the COVID restrictions, we want to make sure that people aren't taking those extra packets of plastic utensils and straws when they're not necessary. And so there are lots of opportunities there for us to move ahead and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions as well as our waste. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Lori. Up next, we have Cassie speaking to us from Stop Waste.
Great, thank you, Robbie. Hi, I'm Casey Bartholomew. I'm a program manager at Stop Waste. And I'm going to build on some of Lori's discussion about ways that we can reduce the climate impacts of wasted food and packaging in our households and businesses. For those of you that might not be familiar with Stop Waste, we're a public agency located in Oakland, working throughout Alameda County, serving the county, our 17 cities, sanitary districts, and 18 public schools. Our agency works with our cities and community members to community partners to help residents, businesses, and schools reduce waste and use resources more efficiently. So I'm going to take a step out to talk a little bit about the problem of wasted food. Next slide, please. Sorry, Robbie, next slide. And then really jump into some of the solutions. So let's first look at just the tremendous amount of food that's currently going to waste. Just yesterday, a group called ReFed released a new report that estimates that in 2019, nearly 35% of the food that is produced in the United States is unsold or uneaten. So this is food that was produced and grown for human consumption. And if we think about that 35% of food that went unsold or uneaten, only a small percentage of this was actually donated or composted. The majority, about 24%, ended up either in landfill, incineration, put down the disposal, or sometimes simply left to rot in the fields. Next slide. And when we waste food, we're also, oh, I'm sorry. Next slide. Okay, we're missing a slide. That's okay. When we waste food, we're also wasting the embodied energy and resources that go into growing, harvesting, transporting, packaging, and eventually distributing that food to our tables. So there are a number of resources that are wasted due to food loss in the United States. Nearly 21% of our fresh water and 19% of our cropland is used to grow food that is never eaten. And if we think about food waste as a country, it's the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases next to China and the United States. I know Rachel earlier mentioned the greenhouse gas emissions and consumption-based inventory that was done in the San Francisco Bay Area. I just wanted to highlight on this graph, you'll notice that 19% of our greenhouse gas emissions in the San Francisco Bay Area come from food. So that includes that scope 3 category as well. And one thing to note is that not all food has the same amount of impact. You can see that meat and dairy as two food categories have much higher greenhouse gas emissions due to the the amount of factors and resources that go into livestock production, including the land and feed and transportation and other inputs required. Next slide. So where is this wasted food coming from? Is it from the production at the farm, processing or transportation, our consumer-facing businesses like restaurants and grocery stores, or our very own households? ReFed found, again, in their more recent report in 2019 that the largest contributor is households, followed by the places where we purchase and consume food. According to the 2019 ReFed Roadmap to Reducing Wasted Food in the US, close to 65% of wasted food comes from consumer-facing businesses and households. And the good news is that that number is actually down from 83%. So we think that some of the efforts at a national scale to educate consumers about ways to reduce food loss and working with businesses have really helped over the last few years. At Stop Waste, our agency's focus is to work with households and commercial food businesses through upstream solutions. So moving up from composting to looking at preventing surplus food from being generated, or recovering edible surplus food to, in the short term, address food insecurity and meet some of those requirements with our new state legislation that Lori mentioned. Next slide. This is just another version of a waste hierarchy specifically focused on food. This is from the EPA. And essentially this inverted pyramid is showing that really building on the traditional waste hierarchy, prioritizing food saving actions such as prevention and donation before considering downstream approaches to composting food scraps has the most impact. And I think I read a stat in the most recent report from REFA that said prevention has an 8-time higher benefit than composting. Also, just, we have all probably seen, especially during this pandemic and COVID impacts in our community, that food insecurity has only increased in our cities and county. I think Alameda County has had a statistic of 1 in 5 residents being food insecure. And I think they've seen close to a 5 to 10% increase in food insecurity in our county. So there's simply no reason why edible food should be going to waste. Next slide. So what can we do about it? Let's move on to the solutions. As a resident, we had a number of resources through our Stop Food Waste campaign and our website at stopfoodwaste.org, where we offer tips and tools to help extend the life of the food that you have at home. And here's a few examples of those tools. Doing a 10-minute fridge reality check to assess what's going to waste in your fridge and the reasons why. We've all heard about meal planning, but shopping your fridge and pantry first before purchasing more food at the store, which can also help reduce the need for frequent shopping trips and using up what you have. Storing fruits and vegetables properly with our fruit and vegetable storage guide is probably the easiest solution to preventing food waste in your home. Knowing the optimal place where to store your food to keep it fresh, or tips like, did you know if you store apples with potatoes, you can prevent those potatoes from sprouting? And we also have many of those tools in multiple languages on our website. And then lastly, the Eat This First sign to indicate areas in your fridge where you can put more perishable food like leftovers that often get shoved to the back and forgotten, items that have a shorter shelf life that should be consumed first over fresher food. Next slide. I'm super excited to announce that we have our very first virtual cooking demo coming up. So we're partnering with Community Climate Solutions and the City of Fremont's Green Challenge to offer a cooking demo with our local partner, Chef Allison. One thing that we've learned through this pandemic is that we're all spending way more time at home in our kitchens cooking and getting more creative with food, and that has increased our confidence and built new skills in the kitchen that has actually helped reduce food loss in our kitchens. So if you're interested in participating, I think you can actually open up your camera and scan this QR code on the screen if you're able to do that. If not, my colleague Hugo is putting a link in the chat, and I encourage you to sign up for the cooking demo. I did want to, next slide, move on just to touch on our grant opportunities. We just opened up a new grant solicitation process for businesses and nonprofit partners, all focused on waste reduction efforts, from our reuse and repair grants, which can include transitioning from disposable packaging to reusable, to our food waste reduction grants, looking at how to prevent surplus food from being generated in the first place, or redistributing that surplus edible food to feed people. We also have surplus food donation equipment grants, which just provide equipment to nonprofits to help facilitate the safe recovery and storage and transport of surplus food for donation. And then lastly, a reusable transport packaging grant for businesses to replace some of those disposable items. And then lastly, I wanted just to touch on the ending of Lori's presentation with packaging. We have partnered with a program called Rethink Disposable, which is offered through a nonprofit called Clean Water Fund. And the program works with cities and food businesses to reduce single-use disposable food serviceware and related packaging. More recently, we worked with several Fremont businesses, the Fremont Boulevard Subway and Bay Street Coffee. And you can see an example here of the before and after shot of the packaging at Subway. They moved from disposable, single-use disposable food serviceware wrapped in plastic to reusable stainless steel utensils and replaced their plastic disposable water cups with a reusable alternative. This work, as you can imagine, has been stalled a bit due to COVID-19, but we are hopeful and are actually currently working on some education and outreach tools for businesses around the safety with using reusables. And eventually we hope to identify opportunities where we can also look at increasing the use of reusables in the county by building in more infrastructure and solutions such as mobile dishwashing, third-party reusable cup and container systems, and supporting businesses with those pilots. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Casey. I just want to say that, in Alameda County, we're super fortunate to have a great agency like Stop Waste working on behalf of all of our residents and businesses to help us reduce waste and think differently about consumption, and also on the energy and climate side as well. Stop Waste is a great implementer and partner in a lot of ways. So, I hear from colleagues in other parts of the state all the time that they wish they had a Stop Waste in their communities. So thanks again for joining us, Casey. And with that, I'd like to address a couple of questions that have come up in the chat. Lori, these are probably, first off for you. So Amelie asked if you could tell us more about SB 1383 in terms of if it's going to apply to all residential units, both single and multifamily, and existing and new construction. And then there's another question on SB 1383 as well from Lisa, who asked about how it will be enforced because, as an example, she said she lives in an apartment and shares a dumpster with her neighbors. So how would they know who's in violation? Would the landlord be on the hook for making sure residents follow the rules? So a lot of implementation questions there.
Great, thank you very much. So for SB 1383, yes, it will apply to everyone, single family, multifamily, commercial businesses, institutions, state agencies, everybody across the board. And so for enforcement actually falls on the city. The requirement is that every one of those entities, the residential, commercial sectors, have a subscription to organic service. And so your question about who's in violation, so the property owner would have to have subscription to organic service with Republic Services, and that would make sure that they're in compliance. And then the city's goal is the ultimate participation of the residents. Obviously, when you live in a multifamily, you won't know who's doing the right thing and who's not. So that we would rely on a lot of education. So we have brochures and posters and stickers, and we can do training. And there'll be audits where people will come in and look at the garbage containers and the organics containers and make sure that the right items are in the right bins. And so the city will be partnering with the county as so we can make sure that those inspections are done. And so the enforcement largely actually falls on the city to make sure that we are in compliance with all the new state rules. Do you want me to answer Iris's question as well?
Yeah, so I was just going to say, Iris asked a question about generally, how does the city, remind people, educate people, and probably also enforce what's going into the different bins, saying that she's seen things like plastic bags and palm fronds in the blue bins.
Right. Well, that's unfortunately a problem. But what we've done is there's our new website, fremont.gov/environment, has some great tips on what goes in each bin. We put out a city newsletter. Republic Services has information on their website, and they also put out newsletters. So if you want to reach out to me directly, I can find out if you live in a multifamily situation or single family and help with any education we can do. Or you can just call us anytime, let us know, send us an email. We're happy to answer any questions for you. Thank you.
Thanks, Lori. Carol also shared just a comment, in terms of the disposable plasticware and things like that. She was saying, maybe we could only give them out upon request. Can you talk a little bit, maybe both Casey and Lori, on, what is happening in terms of disposables, beyond some of those efforts that have been done in partnership with, specific businesses, like the Subway example you shared, Casey?
Certainly. So a couple of years ago, we were talking about banning straws because those were, prevalent, and that was legislation that was happening across the county. So, the first thing you can do is tell your business proprietor, please don't include those extra utensils. I don't need them. 9 times out of 10 these days, we're just taking the food right back to our houses. So we don't need extra plastic utensils. They're not recyclable. They're just trash. So the first thing you do is just tell your restaurant that you don't want them. They don't want to pay for them if you're just going to throw them away. So that's one of the first things you can do. The city is working with the county to implement some pilots around reusable and, perhaps eventually an ordinance banning single-use disposable cups and plates and things like that. So that's a little bit more long-term. Obviously, with the pandemic, our plans for that have been a little bit set back, but you're the best advocate for your restaurants that you patronize. Just tell the owners you don't want the extra materials there. Thank you.
And Lori, from my own experience during COVID and having, delivery of takeout, I have seen that there's a lot of extra, waste that's included in that takeout in terms of those disposable plastic, forks and knives and things like that. Also noticing some restaurants still putting things in styrofoam containers. Can you talk a little bit about that in particular in sort of the context of COVID and how we might be able to better address that excess waste that we're seeing because of the impact of COVID?
Sure, I'll try to address that question. So in Fremont, restaurants are prohibited from using styrofoam for takeout. So if there's a restaurant in Fremont that's using styrofoam, that's a problem. We have a link on our website that you can use to anonymously report them, and we'll go check it out. So everything that's coming in takeout from Fremont should either be recyclable or compostable. That law has been on the books since 2011. So everyone should be well aware of that issue at the moment. Again, when you're ordering items from home, sometimes some businesses do give you the option to click, don't give me extra utensils, don't provide packets of condiments and things like that. As far as COVID-19, there's no evidence that when you touch something that somebody else has touched, you're going to get COVID. So packages are safe for you to touch. That's not a problem. It shouldn't be a concern. You don't have to wipe them down. You don't have to wipe down the bags. You shouldn't be concerned about picking up food or packages, to transmit the virus. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but if you have something more specific, I can address that.
Yeah, so a couple of people were asking for the link, so I just shared it in the chat for reporting Styrofoam. So I think that kind of addresses that question. There's also another question from Mia about what's being done to recycle fabrics. We know that there's a lot of fabrics, old clothing that goes into the waste stream. So can you talk a little bit about what might be done there, what we're doing, or what could be done in the future?
Sure. So if your clothing, your fabrics aren't good enough to donate, there's really nothing else you can do with them. They can't be recycled at this point in our program. They can't be composted. So if they're stained, torn, there are some places that do make rags out of them. You can specifically look for some donation boxes that are able to do that, but that material should just go into your garbage.
Right. I'm not sure if I'm seeing anything else specifically in the chat, but if anybody wants to ask a question, you can use the raise your hand function, or, since our group isn't so huge, you could also just go ahead and unmute yourself to ask the question.
Hi, I have a few questions. I'm freezing on how to raise my hand on here, so I just muted myself. Okay. I'm sorry. Is it okay if I ask now?
Yes, go for it.
Okay, great. I'm Begonia. I'm a resident of Fremont, and I have a few questions. My first one is Republic Services gives residents that ask for it these gallon bottles. If you change your oil, for your car oil, and you can put it there, it's great. It's a great way to do that. I was wondering if you guys have had any talks on doing something similar with a small container of some sort to include batteries like AA's and AAA's and that kind of thing, and also plastic bags. The reason I ask this is because I know there's, people use batteries, right? And people use plastic bags. And rather than giving them a little bit more, like an easier way of getting rid of these things without having to go somewhere to do it. Because I think one of the issues is that when people, and I don't mean everyone, but many people, when people are asked to do the extra step, it's like, come on, I'm already putting it aside. Now I got to take it somewhere, right? When they're asked to do the extra step, it's less likely that they will go the extra step. So having something there, here is a container for plastic bags, and here is a container for batteries, that you don't have to go anywhere to do it. I think that would be a good possibility that I don't know if you guys have discussed or even thought about it, but a lot of people throw this stuff in the garbage because they don't feel like going the extra mile to put them in the right place, whether it's going to a store that takes them or, right, a place that takes them. And sometimes people just can't, they're not mobile, right? So they can't do it either. So those would be good thoughts that I had. And then another thought is how to get rid of baby diapers. I've had 2 kids and a lot of diapers, and I did try the diapers that you can clean, and I'm sorry, I couldn't do it for very long. I'm a full-time single mom. And I work full-time. I couldn't do it for very long. So I end up, and I hate it, I end up throwing these diapers in the garbage. I hate doing that, but I think it's a reality for everyone. And I know some cities, I've seen this because I travel around the world quite a bit. And I've seen cities where they have bins just for diapers. So would that be also something to think about? I don't know. And And then
Okay, let me address your comments here. Great, thank you. You thought a lot about this. I appreciate that. So let me see if I can start with batteries. So batteries, you have a couple options for. You can drop off batteries at any city office. We have buckets in the lobbies that you can drop off batteries. And now, even better, you have an option to have batteries picked up with your weekly garbage service. You just put them in a bag, you put them on top of your cart, and then Republic Services will pick them up. So you don't even have to go anywhere.
That's awesome.
There's information on our website, fremont.gov/environment, about how to do that. So let me go to plastic bags. They're garbage. Throw them away. We can't recycle them anymore. There's no way to collect them. There's no market for them. They're all just garbage at this point. We had to stop taking them, I believe, in 2018 due to some strict quality control requirements for a recycling processor in Asia. Mm-hmm. And so there's no way to collect them. There's no way to recycle them. All your plastic bags should just go into the trash if you're not reusing them for, bathroom bags, pet waste, that mm-hmm. types of items. Mm-hmm. And as far as diapers go, they're just garbage. There's nothing we can do about them unless you're using a service. You can't do everything. The amount of diapers that go into the landfill versus everything else that goes in is minimal. Oh. So don't stress out about it. Okay, it's fine.
I'm not going to worry about it too much. Thank you. I really like that about batteries. I'll be telling people about that. So we just put a plastic bag with batteries in it. Use batteries on top of our garbage bin. Is that it?
Okay, so it looks like there's a correction. So my manager is on the line as well. Thank you, Ken. So batteries are collected when you schedule your bulky item pickup, and all residents in Fremont have 2 free bulky item pickups per year. So that's when you can set out your batteries.
Okay, great. And then I have another question. This is about, when I'm
Begonia, if you can hold off, we have another hand raised. We'd like to make sure we have enough time.
I will write it.
Okay, yeah, go ahead and drop it in the chat.
Yes,
Akasha, it looks like you had a question.
I did. Thank you. I love this initiative, and I love all the stuff that you're doing with compost, because my husband and I started composting a couple of years ago, and we were so excited just to get a tiny bin, like a kitchen top bin, and now we can collect all the food scraps and just put them in. So that's great. I had a question. My daughter started school about 3 years ago, and I'm just sort of staggered by the amount of paper that is being used. It's understandable because, they have to do their worksheets and things like that. But I've just been thinking if it's possible that once we get that sheer volume of paper back home, I hope most of the people put it in recycle bin. But I'm wondering if it's possible to actually do like a once a month or once a quarter collection drive, and that paper can be recycled and just used again for the next academic year. Because there's just the sheer volume of paper that is used, instead of it just hopefully not, going to just the landfill. If it can go to a recycle plant and it gets recycled and then it goes back to the classes again. I understand that the paper has about 4 to 5 life cycles that it can be used again, but I don't know if it's possible to do that.
Lori, you're muted.
Thank you. I'm a little confused about your question. Are you talking about clean paper that needs to be reused, or just random paper that's in school?
No. What I do mean is used paper. So let's say kids do their worksheet or they have their homework, and then you get that back with them, and then they work on that, and then it goes back to the school, or some papers just remains with us, which has, stuff that the kids have done. So I'm thinking most of that paper which comes back to me, I end up just putting it in my recycle bin. I don't know how much of that actually gets recycled. So I'm wondering if it's possible then that all the paper which comes, like a single-use paper which kids have worked on, can actually be recycled to be used again as fresh paper, which can go back to school. I don't know if it's I don't know if you're
well, that's certainly a good idea, you know, for people at home or in school, just to reuse paper on the other side, if that's usable, or if you can print on one side and then reuse it. I don't think we'd be able to do a quarterly collection. We have weekly collection for all the schools and from all the residents and businesses to collect paper. And, you know, paper is one of those things that's easily recycled. So that's not a concern. If it makes it into your recycling bin, it's going to get recycled.
okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Robbie, just acknowledging the time, do we want to, there's a couple other questions that were coming in the chat, but we can probably follow up with those and just go to the closeout slides here. So great. We just wanted to remind everyone again, you know, some really thoughtful comments. Sounds like a lot of the people on the call today are really concerned about, you know, their own footprint and how you can reduce waste at home. And, you know, we'd love to hear your thoughts around this topic in a broader sense. So if you go to fremont.gov/cap consider it, that will bring you to our online virtual forum, because everything is being done virtually right now. This is an opportunity for us to really hear your thoughts, your input, in a way that we could, you know, have done so in sort of a larger community workshop when we can meet in person. So please visit the platform, take a look at the different measures that are on here. You can choose to just weigh in on the waste ones if that's really your interest area, or you can weigh in on everything. And then also, you know, if you have your own suggestions, you can put them into the platform as well. We're going to keep this open through next week, and then we'll be incorporating all of this feedback into our analysis as we look more deeply at specific measures that are going to have a robust greenhouse gas emissions reduction impact aligned with our sustainability vision, and also are, you know, widely supported by the community. So we really want to get as much feedback as possible. And in terms of our timeline, we've been doing outreach, as I mentioned, since the spring, summertime, and really launching into that more heavily this past fall. Now we're working on developing our policies and measures, doing that technical analysis, understanding the emissions reductions impact. We have a consultant team from Ascent Environmental that is helping us with that. And then as we move into the spring, we'll be preparing a draft plan where we have some proposed measures for the community to weigh in on further. We'll be going to various boards and commissions, including the Sustainability Commission, the Planning Commission. We'll do some study sessions with City Council. So there's a lot of additional opportunities for you to share your thoughts and feedback, show your support, comment on things that, you know, you're really passionate about as we move forward. And hopefully by the summer, we'll be finalizing our plan, adopting it, and then launching into implementation. And just a couple of resources for you. All of our information about our climate action plan update is at fremont.gov/climate-action. You can see the timeline. You can find links to past presentations. We'll be putting the recordings from these presentations up once we get the subtitles to them. And we also have a newsletter that goes out on a monthly basis. You can sign up directly if you go to fremont.gov/FGC newsletter. That stands for Fremont Green Challenge. And the Fremont Green Challenge is our residential climate action engagement platform. So this is the way that you as a household can sign up and learn about ways to reduce your impact, whether it's related to transportation, energy, water, waste, food, other consumption. And so when you sign up, you go through a series of questions, you get your baseline carbon emissions for your household, and then you can explore all of the potential ways to reduce your emissions. So we encourage you to participate in that platform as well. There's all sorts of resources linked. So, there's a lot of programs, incentives, educational, websites for you to learn more about how to take action in different areas. So all of that is there for your disposal, your help, to really encourage you to take action. And again, we appreciate everybody here today. And thanks to Lori and Casey for helping us in this discussion. Robbie and I are also available to answer any of your questions via email, and our contact information is below.